There's a moment that's hard to explain because nothing around you has actually changed, but something inside you has. The same routines are still there, the same conversations, the same expectations, but they don't land the same way anymore. Things that used to matter feel quieter now. And things you used to ignore suddenly feel heavy. You still show up. You still do what you're supposed to do. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. But internally, there's a quiet disconnect. Like your life is still built around priorities that no longer feel true to who you're becoming. And what makes it confusing is that nothing bad happened to trigger it. There was no collapse. No clear ending, just a shift, subtle but persistent. This is where a lot of people start questioning themselves. You wonder if you're just losing motivation, if you're becoming inconsistent, if something is wrong with your discipline. Because the structure of your life hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. But this pattern shows up in Scripture more than we realize. Nehemiah was living a stable life. He had a defined role, a position of trust, a predictable rhythm. He was the cupbearer to the king, which meant proximity, security, and influence. Nothing about his external life suggested disruption. But then he hears about Jerusalem, about the broken walls, the state of his people, and something shifts internally. It doesn't immediately change his situation. He's still in the same place, doing the same job. But now there's a weight he can't ignore. In Nehemiah 1, it says he sat down and wept. He mourned for days. He fasted and prayed. The environment didn't change, but his priorities did. What used to be enough for him no longer holds the same meaning. And this is the part that often goes unnoticed. God didn't move him instantly. There was a gap between the internal shift and the external change. He had to keep showing up in a life that no longer fully matched what was happening inside him. That tension is uncomfortable. Because you can't unsee what you now see. You can't go back to caring about things the same way. But you're also not fully in the next thing yet. Martha lives in a different kind of tension. In Luke 10, she's doing what she's always done, hosting, preparing, managing everything that needs to be done. She's responsible, active, engaged. Nothing about her behavior is wrong. But Jesus is in the room, and her sister Mary chooses to sit with him instead of helping. And something about that moment exposes a shift. Not in Mary, but in what actually matters right now. Martha is still operating with her old priorities. Efficiency, responsibility, getting things done. And those things aren't bad. But in this moment, they're no longer aligned with what God is doing. Jesus doesn't correct her work ethic. He addresses her focus. He says she is worried and distracted by many things, but only one thing is needed right now. Mary has chosen that, and it won't be taken from her. That's a subtle but important shift. Martha isn't rebuked for doing something wrong. She's being invited to recognize that her priorities haven't caught up to God's presence in the moment. And that's where a lot of people find themselves. You're still functioning well, still productive, still responsible. But internally, there's friction. Because what used to define doing well no longer feels accurate. Then there's Peter. After everything he experienced with Jesus, after the calling, the miracles, the conversations after the moment where he said he would never walk away, he finds himself back at something familiar. In John 21, after the crucifixion, Peter goes fishing. It's not random. It's what he knows. It's where his old identity still makes sense. And for a moment, it feels easier to return to something that used to work than to sit in the uncertainty of what comes next. But even there, something is off. They fish all night and catch nothing. The effort is there, the skill is there, but the result is empty. Then Jesus shows up on the shore. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, almost ordinary interaction. He tells them to cast the net on the other side, and suddenly there's a catch. And in that moment, recognition begins. Later, Jesus speaks directly to Peter, not about his failure in detail, not about the past in a condemning way, but about love and direction. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. What Jesus is doing is not just restoring Peter emotionally. He's realigning his priorities. He's pulling him out of the instinct to return to what is familiar and anchoring him in what now matters. Peter is standing in that space between who he was and who he's becoming. The old life is still accessible, but it no longer produces what it used to. And the new life isn't fully formed yet, but it's already calling him forward. This is the pattern. God often shifts your priorities before he changes your environment. You start to feel misaligned with things that once felt normal. Not because they became wrong, but because they're no longer central. And in that space, It can feel like you're losing clarity, but you're not. You're gaining it in a way that hasn't fully translated into your external life yet. Nehemiah carried a burden before he was released into action. Martha had to recognize that presence mattered more than performance in that moment. Peter had to face that returning to what was familiar no longer fulfilled what had been placed inside him. None of them transitioned instantly. There was always a gap, a stretch of time where their inner world had shifted, but their outer life hadn't caught up yet. And that gap can feel like confusion if you don't recognize the pattern. But maybe this isn't confusion. Maybe this is clarity that hasn't fully formed into structure yet. Maybe the reason things feel off is not because you're doing life wrong, but because what matters to you is no longer the same. And your current life is still organized around an older version of you. In Scripture, when God speaks or initiates something, it often creates a tension before it creates movement. A promise is given, a realization happens. But fulfillment takes time, and in that time, identity is being reshaped, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. You begin to notice what drains you, what feels empty, what no longer holds your attention. And at the same time, you start to feel drawn toward things you didn't prioritize before. Quietly but persistently, that's not random. That's the beginning of reordering. And it doesn't always look like a clear decision at first. Sometimes it just looks like discomfort. Like a lack of alignment you can't fully explain. Like showing up to a life that still works, but no longer fits. Nehemiah couldn't ignore the burden once it settled in him. Martha had to see that being present mattered more than being productive in that moment. Peter had to realize that going back wasn't actually moving forward. And in each case, God was already active before anything visibly changed. So if things feel misaligned right now, it might not be because you've lost direction. It might be because something deeper has already shifted. And your life is in the process of catching up to it.